Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming. I know you've got a great choice of talks and unfortunately you're at mine, but I'll try my best. So I'm going to talk to you today about our pixel art game, specifically how we've gone from it looking like this a couple of years ago to looking a bit more like this, and finally we're in this kind of space now. So specifically what I want to cover is how we've taken a bunch of classic influences and how we've turned that into something that looks authentic, how we built that basis. And then how we've used UE4 to go beyond what we consider authentic, but in a way that's still kind of, respectful to the source material. And finally, as not many people are using Paper 2D, I really don't know why, just a couple of tips that I wish we'd known before we'd got started. So first, a little summary, just to give you some context about myself and the company. So I'm the design director at our 6-person studio, Cardboard Sword. Day to day, that kind of means that I'm responsible for maintaining the vision, doing a bit of level design, gameplay, that sort of thing. Though if you speak to the artists, I'm really there to make their life as difficult as possible. And I don't necessarily disagree. So I've been working independently for over 3 years now, and I'm still alive, and I'm still able to eat, so I don't think it's going that badly. Before that, I worked in AAA for about 9 years. The last thing I shipped was Forza Horizon 3, a large open-world sort of simulator-ish racing game. I'm not working on anything like that anymore. I'm working on The Siege and the Sandfox. Now, The Siege and the Sandfox is what we're calling a stealthania. And it's a phrase that we made up just to quickly explain the game, but it really has stuck. And it really just refers to the two main pillars of our game. And those pillars are obviously stealth. There is a focus on taking, the scenic route, not just rushing in, taking time to consider your options, being stealthy, being smart. All the mechanics support that. And the other side of it is exploration. Exploration, like you might remember from classic Metroid games or any Metroidvania, really. It is a common genre. So we have this large contiguous open world, and progress through it is gated through a mix of just players mastering the parkour controls, which have a fair degree of depth to them, and also the classic sort of unlocking of abilities as time goes on. It's also a pixel art game. I probably should have mentioned that, and in theory that's why you're here, but yeah, I'd sometimes forget after all this time. Now, a common misconception is that the artists on the project have worked on lots of pixel art games before. That's something they specialize in. And actually, that's not true. They too came from a AAA background. They worked on things like Unreal Tournament 2004, Unreal Championship, and Elite Dangerous, all sort of, modern 3D sci-fi, hard surface stuff. In other words, nothing like this at all. But like me, they fancied doing something a bit different, and that's kind of where we all came together. And why we decided to make a 2D Stealthania is for another talk, but let's just say we really liked Mark of the Ninja, and we felt there was space to make something like it. The first point to start when we all got together was to assemble a list of influences, classic games that we liked the look of, and we wanted to break down and see if we could use that to basically form the basis of the art direction for the game. So we started with one that keeps coming back, which is a Batman game by Sunsoft on the NES, or NES, if that's how you choose to live your life. And I'd never heard of this game before. I've still never played it, don't tell anyone, but the artists always use this as their primary example. And in my opinion, actually, it's quite easy to see why. If you look at this one screenshot here, Batman is 3 colors, but you can still recognize that he's Batman. And nothing else in the scene is really more than a handful of colors itself. The NES was very limited in that regard. And obviously, the other thing is that nearly a quarter of the screen is completely black, just one color. And that's obviously a technical limitation. They couldn't fill that if they wanted to. But here it's being used with purpose. It's negative space that's drawing your eye towards the detail where they have spent it, which is obviously on Batman. And you can see this in more recent games, like Zelda on the SNES. Recent is a relative term. And there's no pitch black in this image, but there's large areas for the grass and the water of just solid color. And again, same principle. Not much detail there. Draws your eye towards the center where they spent the time and attention and the detail. So that's something we wanted to do. And the same thing with Metal Slug. I don't think you can really talk about pixel art without talking about Metal Slug. We don't have any specific thing we like about this. It's just the general high level of attention to detail. Everything is so polished. The animations have so much character. This is kind of our high bar, particularly just the way the characters bounce up and down. It's just so charming. So what were the common themes among those things we just saw? Well, I would say that they embraced the technical limitations they had. They didn't fight them. They saw what they had, and they worked with it. That mostly includes the restricted color palette. Again, 3 or 4 shades at most. And they use this combined with lots of negative space, lots of areas where technically there is nothing, but it's pointing towards something much more interesting. So we felt we had enough information to actually start putting something together. But before we rushed into using a game engine, we wanted to start by just mocking something up in Photoshop. Now, as discussed earlier, the artist had never made pixel art before, so I want to stress this isn't a level like a final scene. It doesn't match any of the reference we've seen, in terms of detail, but you can see the beginnings of the game. We can see we've got the negative space, way too much of it, but we can see it's there, and we can see we have the limited color palette. It's way too limited. It reminds me a lot of Quake 1 or Thief or something, but the principles are there, and we can see that it's probably going to work. And I have to show the animations because the Metal Slug influence is clear. I love these. They're still charming little animations, even though we've got much better ones now. So we actually started with Game Maker because we started this game a long time ago, and at the time, Unreal Engine was still subscription-based, and we just wanted to feel it out a little bit first. So this was the first little level we threw together in there. Now this looks a lot better than that reference image, thankfully, but I think you can see that it's still adhering to all those, the guidelines we put together. There's still a large amount of negative space that's drawing your eye towards the detail, and while the scene looks much more colourful overall, each individual element only has a handful of colours, more than Batman, but still, severely limited. And you can see this most obviously when you look at any of the gradients. We have very few gradients, and there's basically no translucency, because by our own limitations, we can't do that. So we did this, and we felt pretty confident. We felt that we had something. But the problem really was that Game Maker wasn't the engine for us. It's a fantastic engine, but obviously looking at our AAA past, we already have experience with Unreal Engine. We have aspirations to make 3D titles in the future. Imagine that, whole third dimension. So it just wasn't going to work for us. So you'll be shocked to discover we did move to Unreal Engine. So we basically took the assets that we had from the Game Maker version, threw in some very rudimentary lighting, and put it together for a dev grant pitch. And it ended up looking like this, which looks dramatically better considering it's exactly the same assets from the previous shot, just with some lighting. The lighting was a pretty easy win. We pretty much just turned it on, and it looked a lot better. Some of the shots are more dramatic, like that earlier one. Some of them are quite subtle, like this. I admit, you can barely tell the difference, but that's okay, because we're wanting to build upon the pixel art rather than do something that disrupts that. We often got asked, even at this stage, how have you got this to work? Because officially, Paper 2D and the materials you're provided with don't work when they are lit. I'll be honest, pretty much just turn it on, and it did work. There are some problems. We didn't get shadows, and there were a few little issues, which I'll come to later, but by and large, we got what we wanted from it without too much trouble. Come on, clicky thing, there we go. So lighting was, as I said, an easy win. It pretty much just worked, and it made things dramatically better. But we had to kind of be careful here, because now we're in a situation where we have a lot more power than we had before. We can, apply all kinds of crazy effects, but we're really going to start ruining what we have if we start attacking this foundation. So we need to sort of move beyond what we'd actually used to start with. We needed something, a bit of a stronger rule set. There we go. So the way I wanted to handle this was to look at things in terms of authenticity. And my best example of authenticity, I think, actually comes from my days at Playground Games. Now, that's an open world racing game, and it's broadly a simulator, but not exactly. And I would argue that really all of those cars handle authentically, how you expect them to, not realistically. And I'll give you a specific example. If you fire up the game, hop in a Ferrari F40, notoriously hard car to drive in real life, I'm sure most people who play that game, people who don't even drive, genuinely feel that that's what it would be like to drive that car. It feels authentic. However, if I then handed them the keys to the real one, it's not really going to work. And I'd say that's what we're doing with the art here. What we're saying is, we want this to look like you genuinely believe those old games look, but actually, if you went back to them, that's not how they look. And it's a kind of fine balance to get that right. So our starting point to do this was to respect those core limitations we've talked about. We use those as our foundation. We're not going to compromise those wherever possible. And anything we use on top of that is going to enhance something that already exists. We're going to use it with intent. We're going to say, why are we using this effect? And the answer can't be, because I can just press a checkbox and it works, because that's often the case. So the biggest limitations regarding what they could do with pixels in these classic games, or more accurately, what they couldn't do. Really, they couldn't scale them or change the size of them, so you're always going to be able to count the pixels across the screen. They're always going to be one size. You can't arbitrarily scale them for the same reason. It just wasn't really possible. We're not talking about Mode 7 for anyone old enough to know what that is. But you couldn't rotate them either. They're all things you couldn't do. Easily summed up with this one image from the game. So on one side of me, we've got the painstakingly hand-animated version of this water wheel with 16 frames of animation. Took a fair amount of time. On the other hand, it's just an image that's been rotated. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of people probably can't tell the difference. I'll be honest, I'll have a look on a screen of this size. I can tell the difference. Hopefully some of you can. But it doesn't really matter if you can or not. It's a very subtle thing. And as you'll see going through, cumulatively, all these little things add together that make the game feel the way it does. And I think, honestly, even for players, subconsciously, they'll appreciate this, even if they can't point to it as a thing that's actually making a difference. The same with the limited color palettes. If we bring up Batman again, he's 3 colors. I'll give you an example. This is even applied to me. When I was preparing this presentation, I thought, oh, he's about 6 or 7 colors. He's not, it's literally 3. So even in my head, over the space of a couple of months, I'm misremembering it. So we're just kind of trying to do that over a longer period of time. You look at this, our character's about 16 colors, but you've still in both of them, you've got these areas of like, flat shaded single colors, and you'll think, yeah, they look about the same. But when we put them side by side, they absolutely don't. It's just enough there to evoke the memory of those classic games without being, restrained too much by what they could actually do. And we extend the same thing to our tile set as well. We've got no more than 4 to 6 shades of any color in there, and the whole lot is no more than 80 or 90 colors for the entire world. And just by limiting yourself in that manner, that necessitates the way the artists are going to work. It's not full of gradients, there's no fake translucency, because we literally cannot afford to do it. And as you can see in the tiles, there's lots of them that are maybe 50% or more black, and that's just fine. Another obvious one, but worth pointing out, is we use an orthographic camera. So did they. Why not? Even at this stage, I should point out, lots of people told us this was probably a bad idea, but we ignored them. And we'll come back to that later, because we were probably wrong to do that. Another thing that's become popular with lots of indie pixel art games is to apply normal maps. What a lovely normal map that is. And we thought about it. We did strongly think about it for quite some time. I think the opinion among all of us and the artists was that really often it's just destroying the sort of classic aesthetics of those games. It's really removes the charm. I think the obvious exception is anything that's a bit more hard-edged and sci-fi, like traditional normal maps can add a lot to that, but it wasn't working for us. But then saying that, it was easy to try, and the artists gave it a go, using the traditional method where they were using it to add, surface detail to things in the same way as they would for 3D games. However, the surface detail just came across as surface noise, and for the reasons I've highlighted, we just didn't want that. So basically, we got rid of all of them, and the artist deleted it, so much so that there's not a single image of it that still exists, so that's why you've been staring at this terrible placeholder. Sorry. So just to summarize those simple rules, the main one really is that we want to maintain pixel purity. We don't want to distort the pixels or resize them or do anything drastic to the whole scene. The more you do that, the less it feels like one of these classic games, and the more obvious it is for someone to point to that thing and go, no, that didn't happen in those games that I remember. Likewise with the limited color palette. We're not as limited as they were, but you can count all the different shades of colors. And we still use the same camera, and we still just avoided normal maps because it just wasn't working for us. But even at this stage, there's always going to be some opportunities to bend the rules and be flexible. And our rules were basically that if there was a clear intent behind what we were doing, we could see what the advantage was, and it was just supporting an already existing feature, it could be considered. The first thing we tried was to try and solve a mechanical issue we have, because obviously we have the general lighting system and things are lighter and darker, but also as a stealth game, it's really important to telegraph to the player if they're visible to enemies or not. That's more of a binary state. You are or you're not. So we did this with using lookup tables. Very simple stuff for any 3D art, but obviously not something they would have done at the time. And I would say this is really only a bend because while it's using more colors overall, each set has the same limits. So it doesn't really cause too many problems. Just a simple way that in a modern engine it made life a lot easier for us. Something slightly more controversial at the time is that we were, in some instances, actually distorting the pixels. This kind of snuck through mostly because it's incredibly localized, it's in a very small area, so we're not kind of destructing the whole scene, but also these lights were used everywhere and it was just supporting, the flickering effects that were already there. It wasn't adding something completely new. However, this did give us our first window into the troubles we might have with the orthographic camera. So this effect, again, not crazy complicated by the artist's own admission, but they assumed they'd be able to do it in the same way they used to do in the past, using an array of refraction techniques. Unfortunately, those don't work with the orthographic camera, as we discovered. And while this isn't a huge problem, it just meant they had to spend a little bit more time thinking of another way to do it. Again, super simple. I highlight this not because it's incredibly complicated, but just because it was an example of a situation where something we assumed would just happen actually took a bit of work to get around. But the effect looked nice, and we used it for some water situations and some other, limited localized distortion, and I think it looks pretty nice. If you want to see more detail on that, we did actually do a blog post on it a while back now, so feel free to have a look. Now, outside of the art, the other thing that's obviously going to really contribute to the look and feel of these is how the levels are put together, which unfortunately is my job. So the biggest, most obvious thing is it's tilemap based. We have a series of tiles, they're all 32 by 32 pixels, and they're all aligned to a grid. This is super important because obviously that's the same limitation they had, so we never deviate from that grid. Except when we do. So if I give you this example here, where I've got some props in the background there highlighted. They look okay, they fit neatly into the background, but it just looks so much nicer if we just move them around a little bit. It just feels a little bit more organic. So these guys are sat on a 16 by 16 grid. Again, bending of the rules. They're both on a grid, they don't just share the same grid. And again, I think this all goes in the category of things that are so subtle, I don't think people will notice, but together they kind of compound and make things feel more polished. And I'll give a quick run through of how the different layers work. So we'll start with, obviously the most important one, the design layer. And this is basically what determines all the collision, and it has some metadata markup for if tiles can be seen through by the player or enemies, and also some of the things for parkour, running up walls, holding onto things, that sort of stuff. Then the artists use that as their guide to paint over the foreground. That's pretty simple. And then they add some detail to the background, and then most of the extra sort of little polish comes in the foreground, or the super foreground as they call it, like the most close to the camera as possible. But it still has that classic look, but we added more layers than you might have had at the time, and the half tiles as well. Then, once the tile map's got everything in it that we need, we just put it in a standard Unreal level file and add in everything else that we might need. So lights, animated sprites, post-process, gameplay entities, that sort of thing. And that gets us to here, which is sometime in 2017, which seems a long time ago. Hopefully you can see that it's still there, like the classic thing, the classic aesthetics are still there. You can still count pretty much all the pixels across the screen, but you've still got the areas of negative space. But everything looks a little bit nicer. The lighting's doing a bit more on this extra depth. However, it's still a little bit on the flat side, so maybe we can actually move beyond this. And I'd say that we got to this point where everything feels authentic. Everything looks like you honestly remember those games look, even if they don't. But now we'd been working with Unreal and 2D Engine for quite a while, and we were confident that we knew what would look good and what wouldn't, and maybe it was also time to reevaluate some of the decisions we'd made in the past. The first one to revisit was normal maps. We were still pretty much convinced these didn't really work for our kind of game, but then Dead Cells happened. And Dead Cells does a fantastic job of maintaining that chunky pixel art aesthetic while at the same time having normal maps. So we had a go at it. And these were done by hand, and they were done in a different way that they might approach normal maps to a 3D game. So rather than trying to add more detail to the surface, instead they were using the normal maps to sort of sculpt the broad shape, so when the light passed over it, it enhances the chunkier shape rather than trying to add more detail. Now, as I said, this was something they did by hand. There's a little step-by-step there, and there's a full Gama Sutra article about the thing linked at the bottom. I'll be honest, as a non-artist, I get about halfway down, and it starts to look like this for me. But if it's all good for you, you can do it. It just takes quite a long time. We often refer to it as sending them to Rainbow Prison because it was very time-consuming. Now, you may be thinking, well, okay, that's very time-consuming, but couldn't you have used some automated process like these ones? So obviously there's grayscale conversion and shape recognition. And we did try them, and if you see these in isolation, the light has an impact. It's doing something, but I would argue that the hand-painted one looks much better. The artists who made the normal map made the asset. They know in their head, what this is supposed to look like where a 3D object, and I think that comes across. Now, I should point out that they could have spent more time trying to refine the source assets used for the grayscale conversion and the shape recognition, but their very strong argument was, if I'm going to spend the time doing that, why don't I just make the normal map myself? And I didn't really have a good counter-argument, so that's what they did. So I think it's pretty clear in that one, but I think it's particularly obvious in this next example. So if we look at the other two methods there, It's doing something, it's adding something to the scene, but I'd argue if you look at the wheel in this example, it's just so much more defined, the wheel shape, the shape of the object, in a way that only the artist who made the asset is going to be able to do. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. In this example, that's before, that's after, you can barely tell the difference. But that's okay. Particularly in a static image, we're not looking for it to, scream in your face that we're using normal maps. It's just all adding to the subtle things that are enhancing that pixel art that's already there. And, we can combine it with particles and it looks nice. This is basically trying to emulate sort of the first Sandbox example we had. That's fairly subtle, I believe. This is less subtle, but we feel like after a while we've kind of earned the time, earned the ability to push it a bit harder. And obviously by this stage, none of this is stuff that would be possible in an engine at the time, but we feel like we've got people along for the ride now, so it's okay to occasionally do things like that. And something else that we revisited is the way that we were shifting around colors. So before, this was done with a lookup table, which was used for these two versions to say if you're visible to NPCs or not. But it wasn't that flexible. If we wanted to do it for lots of characters and sort of mix and match, it was time consuming. And also, someone like me shouldn't really be messing around with those and, potentially damaging the source material. It was a bad idea all round. What I really needed was something like this. Some way that I could just go in and just change the colors, see what I thought looked good in real time without ever touching the actual pixels. So I can't ever ruin anything, which is, the artist's dream, really. And this allowed us to do that. The way we did it was that we would take the color image, we'd convert it to grayscale, a specific set of grayscale, and then we'd use a material instance to bind those different shades to different colors. Now, the problem is, a very minor problem, but again sort of shows how we had to keep doing things the hard way, is that obviously you can't just convert it to grayscale, because if you do that, often they just always end up the same shade. So the compromise really was that the artist would open it up in Photoshop, open the source assets, manually convert it to a predefined set of colors for a single frame, and then they would have saved that as action script and go back through and just do all of the frames. And those are saved for all the characters. Now, this specific set were chosen so that we could go through each step and generate some masks for each of the different sets of pixels. And that means that it's incredibly easy to make all kinds of weird and wonderful color combinations. The two in the middle we use for like tutorial ghosts and last known position. The last one is horrendously ugly and is literally hitting the randomize button, but just an example of we could do anything, and that made things much more flexible. And again, it's something only possible in a modern engine, but the end result is something that doesn't look out of place in a classic pixel art game. And that takes us to sometime last year, where the differences again are much more subtle, but we haven't compromised on the core there. I think it's still pretty much the same game, but it just all feels a bit more solid. But there was one more thing that we did need to look at again, and that was the perspective camera. Now, for a long time, we just kind of got on with it and lived with all the weird foibles and just stuff that you'd expect to work and wouldn't. And every now and then, we'd speak to people at Epic and say, we're having some trouble getting this to work in the orthographic camera. And they'd say, well, why don't you just use the perspective camera? And we just think, what do you know? And then we realized that they probably knew what they were talking about, and we should probably listen. However, our concern was always that we'd end up with something like this. This is drastically exaggerated, but we'd end up with all our layers swimming around, and it would just look very strange, and we were so worried that would happen. We just overlooked all the trouble we were having. We never got shadows to work. A lot of the more advanced rendering things we wanted to play around with just didn't work, and so none of our walls could really act as solid things that would block lights. And one day, one of the artists in frustration just went, should we just try it? And it was pretty much fine. We did have to squish down some of our layers in depth. It is all very flat in that dimension now. But other than that, another thing that pretty much just worked. And again, it looks pretty subtle. The change here is really that when you look at all of the rooms, each different area, the walls are actually blocking light. Imagine that. So they look different colors. It just makes everything feel a bit more solid. It's maybe slightly more obvious in this shot. So it just made everything look a lot nicer. We did start thinking a little bit about performance here. Not that we're too worried about it, but we never thought about it at all before because obviously the sort of lights we were using. So now we were a bit more cautious with it. Only lights that are going to cast interesting shadows are set up to be movable. And a little hack we had to undo from our wall torch earlier is that to simulate flickering before, it did physically move around, which obviously is not a good idea for performance. So we locked that down, and instead now just the radius changes, and I didn't even notice the difference. Oh yes, I forgot there's a picture of that. So, Speaking of performance, I'll talk a little bit about it, only because people do ask me about it occasionally, and I think perhaps they need to recalibrate from what their expectations are from AAA, because there's just nothing to worry about here. So in terms of our materials, they're incredibly basic. That's not because the artists aren't capable of making weird and wonderful materials. It's that, our general thought process is don't do any more there than you need to. The pixel art should speak for itself. So that's probably one of the biggest materials we have. We have a handful of those, handful of instances. That's it. In terms of the normal maps for the tiles, 2K textures covers the whole world, so it's nothing really. And as discussed, lighting is minimal, no more than 510 in the scene, and everything's neatly spaced out. In terms of the whole world, again, by actual modern game standards, it's tiny. So we've changed the Unreal units to be 1 pixel for obvious reasons. And the world is about 30,000 pixels wide by about 12,000 tall. So that's, I wrote it here because I knew I'd forget. That's about 300 meters by 120 meters. It's nothing, it's microscopic. Honestly, our only performance concerns are much more related to AI because we're leaning on a lot of the existing sort of quite advanced AI systems for Unreal, but that's obviously a talk for another day. But in terms of graphics, there are no concerns there at all. So in terms of starting with Paper 2D, there's not too much to worry about, but these are just genuinely things I wish I'd known because we spent more time than we needed to. The first one is something that came up from day one, and actually in our first ever pitch of this game, we left this in, but you end up with this weird tearing because by default, UV padding isn't turned on for the tiles. Now, it's an obvious thing to fix, but not when you don't know that in Unreal it's called border margin, and for some reason in Paper 2D only, it's turned off. So 2 seconds to fix, but easy when you know how. Another thing is that if you're going to want animation state machines or notifies, which you probably are, you don't get any support for that out of the box. And our early solution to it was a horrendous hack, which I would never tell anyone how it worked, but it was not good. Luckily, someone solved that problem for us. There's a studio called Critical Failure Studio. Don't let the name fool you. It's actually great. This will give you the anim notifiers. This will give you the state machine. It's great. If you think you're going to need those, do go and buy it. Sadly, I'm not on commission because I think I would have made a fair amount by now. Right. And oh yes, if you really want to fight the orthographic camera, little tip. By default, in many ways in Unreal, the orthographic camera isn't considered to move. So if you're starting to build a large world like we are and you're moving very far away from the origin, you'll find that the lights just start fading out, even though the power is actually the same in the editor. And that's just a level of detail thing because it thinks they're so far away, they're irrelevant. If you pop into the project settings, you can just change the min screen radius to 0.0, essentially disabling that. And for a game of our scale, it was never a problem. But seriously though, just don't use the orthographic camera. The gains were so small versus what we lost, it's not worth it. So to sum everything up, really the focus should just be making something that is authentic. It doesn't matter what that means to you, it's not going to mean the same thing to everything, but you need to know what it means to you and be able to align that with your chosen influences. And inevitably once you've done that, you'll discover that most of the shortcuts you thought you were going to take to get there aren't going to work. And resist the urge to compromise on those. Whenever people ask me about the game, specifically the way it looks and how he did it, if I read between the lines, I think really they're looking for this menu. They're looking for a button they can just flip to tighten the graphics, make it look good. It doesn't exist. You're just not going to get it. As a photographer, it reminds me of the situations that's so frustrating when I take a beautiful picture and I'm very happy with it and someone sees it and they go, yeah, that's a great picture. You must have a really nice camera. And I have to strongly resist the urge to punch them because it doesn't matter what you use to take it. The tool really doesn't matter. It's how you put it all together. Saying that though, why not use Unreal Engine 4? I heard it's pretty good at that sort of thing. In all seriousness though, it still blows my mind that people just don't seem to think it's possible. To the degree where a couple of years ago we had this game on Epic Stand at GDC below the world's biggest Unreal logo of all time. And people would play the game, and they would look at me, and they would say, yeah, that looks nice. What engine is it made in? And I would just step to the side, and they would realize what had happened. There's no reason not to. There's nothing that's missing from here. I hope that I've shown you that really this game is just a culmination of looking at classic games, appreciating those aesthetics, and working how you can sympathetically use modern techniques to enhance those. In other words, it's mostly hard work, but that's a good thing, because anyone can work hard, and anyone can use the exact same tools that we use in Unreal Engine to make that. And with that, I'd like to point out that you can watch me do this on a regular basis and struggle with them on Twitch. And also, if you've got any other questions, please do consult our website, because we regularly make blog posts about these sort of things. And with that, thank you very much.